believe we're recording this. This is Joellen Gray, and I'm the chapter leader for the New England YANA, Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. And I see that we are just now joined by Rachel Littman. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you so much for all your help.
Technology. No problem. Welcome everyone to 1 year later for this program. We're so delighted, and thank you very much, Joellen, for getting everybody back. And thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. We really have a lot to learn, and we hope to be able to share the messages and what you guys are all facing and doing, because you really are the heroes. And thank you for educating everyone and standing there and doing all the work that really needs to get done on the ground. And thank you to all the students that you work with. So Joellen, I'll let you go. I'm going to stay offline. We'll be doing Q&A and chat, and I will help monitor those in the background. So feel free to ask questions, and I think the panelists can see them, or we'll certainly have some time at the end. So Joellen.
Great, perfect. So even in the best of times, educational leaders have a tough road. They provide a critical service, but it's constrained by government regulation, workers' contracts, racism and otherisms, lack of sufficient funding, requirements tied to financial support, limited technology, and very important, the social and emotional needs of the people that are engaged at every level. Last year, we brought together this panel of stellar educational leaders to discuss how they planned to address education to students, kindergarten through college, during this pandemic year. And it was a difficult year, but somehow they did it. For those outside of the world of education, we heard about in-class versus remote learning, hybrid scheduling, live streaming, and how tough this year was on teachers, parents, and students. I heard very little about administrators, perhaps because they had their heads down and were working really hard to make it all happen. As we prepared for tonight's presentation, I did hear a candid insight from one of the panelists who said, "I feel like I'm in year 2 of a war and I have no resources." I wonder if that person knows who they are. This is a very important conversation, because school disruption carries very high social and economic costs with reverberating impact on students and their families, teachers, administrators, and staff. In fact, upon the very structure of the educational institution itself. Tonight, we're going to address 4 core issues. The first is the education gap. Is it worse this year after the pandemic year? And what's being done to shore up fundamental skills and ensure educational continuity? The second is health and safety. How can schools protect students, teachers, and staff? Are vaccination and mask mandates the answer? The third, social and emotional consequences of the pandemic. Some teachers described PTSD reactions to the stress of teaching last year. Others talk about the mental health of students faced with radically changed expectations. And finally, the education system. Throughout the corporate world, employers are making workplace and policy changes to improve the health, safety, and accommodate the demands from employees. How will the pandemic experience alter the delivery of education into the future? While no one has clear answers today, we know that these leading educators think creatively at the forefront of issues, and we are very eager to hear their thoughts. So let me introduce our panelists. You can raise your hand. First is Jeremy Chiappetta. Jeremy is an SOM grad, CEO of Blackstone Valley Prep, comprising 6 charter schools serving over 2,000 students in K-12 in Rhode Island. Second, Megan Hughes, Yale College, president of the Community College of Rhode Island, the largest community college system in New England. The third, Leslie Torres Rodriguez, superintendent of Hartford Public Schools, the largest public school system in Connecticut. Dr. Rodriguez is also a Broad Fellow, and the new Broad Center opened at SON this year. And Pericles Lewis, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Vice President for Global Strategy at Yale University. And our moderator tonight is Seth Zimmerman, Associate Professor of Economics at SOM, who studies labor economics and public finance with a focus on the economics of education. And Seth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Joellen. It's a pleasure to be here talking today with this great panel. As Joellen said, I'm Seth Zimmerman. I teach at SOM courses about the economics of education. We've been living through this past year one of the signal events to affect the education system that I think we'll ever see. And we have here today, a panel of people who've experienced different aspects of it as leaders of major educational institutions. So I want to start just by congratulating the panel on being here and on leading your institutions through this past year, through the challenges that we've all faced as leaders, as parents, as educators. So I wanted to start off this panel just by letting you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience and telling the audience about the institution that you lead and what you've learned over the past year. How did it go? What were the big challenges that you faced? I don't want to cold call.
I'm happy to go first. So I'm Megan Hughes, and as Joellen said, thank you for that introduction. I'm the president here at CCRI. So we serve roughly 20,000 for-credit Rhode Islanders annually. In terms of who we serve and how the year went, I think I would offer the following. We serve the highest number of low-income students of any college in Rhode Island, and the highest number of first-generation college students, and the highest number of students of color. So my guess is all the listeners to this forum can already anticipate how I would answer the question. Our students come from the communities that have been hardest hit by this pandemic, and that is reflected in the very basic metrics that a college like mine would be measured. So I'm struck by listening to sort of the opening, which was incredibly kind and congratulatory. As a president, I think when I look at our performance, it doesn't feel worthy of congratulations, except for the fact that somehow our students, our faculty, our staff, and my entire team are still coming back to the college every day. So that's the most honest thing that I can say, which is I'm incredibly proud of every single person that is staying with the college through this crisis.
I can jump in next. Hartford Public Schools. So we have 39 schools. 18 of those are magnet schools, and so that means that we operate within an ecosystem of school choice. And of those about 18,000 students, we do draw from over 65 towns. And so yes, that brings a real asset in terms of diversity. But, we do have a higher, level of need. Approximately half of our students are Hispanic, a third are Black, and the majority of them do reside in communities that have, a higher level of need. Roughly 80% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch, and about 20 to 21% have receive special education services and are multilingual learners. And so I would, if I step back, some of the lessons learned, our students in our community, like Megan referenced, have long-standing needs, right, that the pandemic, exacerbated. And it's essential now more than ever that we understand those new and deeper student needs. And remote and in-person instruction, the shifting back and forth, it was really tough. It was really hard. And remote instruction did not serve the majority of our students well.
Here, here. So Jeremy Chiam in Rhode Island, leading Blackstone Valley Prep. We have six schools, K-12, and we 2/3 of our kids are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. Vast majority of our kids will be first generation college, and the pandemic has hit our community. I would say the trifecta pandemic of just COVID ravaging Rhode Island and Central Falls in particular, which is where a large number of our kids and families are from. Just our country's racism and facing racism that we've faced this past year in ways that we haven't come to that reckoning in quite a while, and need a lot more to do to really, become a better place. And then the third is connected to both of those things, which is just incredible polarity, politicization, and that trifecta pandemic has been really challenging. And yet there's hope. There is so much hope and enthusiasm. We open for kids on Monday of next week, and our faculty's been back for a week and a half getting ready. And just the joy that I saw tonight as families were coming in for meet and greets, we're energized and excited to move forward.
And so I'm Pericles. I'm a vice provost at Yale, and I first just want to say, well, thank you for having me, and I want to just say how much I'm in awe of my co-panelists who are operating under incredibly difficult circumstances. And I'm, of course, operating under much less difficult circumstances and with a lot of resources, but I will say it has not been an easy year by any means. I'll mention also that, for those of you who are alumni from some time ago, when you come back to Yale, you'll find that it is a much more diverse place than it was, for example, when I started teaching here 23 years ago. Diverse not only ethnically, but also in terms of Pell Grant eligible, social class background, and other areas too, more international students than there once were, and so on. And that's had, there have been wrinkles connected to that. I think the main factor from the point of view of undergraduate education is that the resources that our students can draw on vary a lot depending on the kind of family background they have, whether they have Wi-Fi at home, how comfortable it is for them to stay at home. And people of all social classes might have difficult family dynamics that cause it to be difficult for them to study from home. We were able to bring at any one time about 70 or 75% of Yale undergraduates to campus, but that meant that at any one time about a quarter and plus a few who chose to stay elsewhere. So maybe about a third of the undergraduates were somewhere else. And that creates a lot of complexity. Much of the education was online. I think we were pretty effective at delivering online remote education, where the faculty member talks to the students on Zoom usually. We had a certain number of in-person classes, but the in-person activities, just getting together to eat, to live in your residential college, to interact with your classmates, to come to office hours, those were very, very important. And so we, recognizing that it was going to be hard to hold many in-person classes under conditions of social distancing and so on, we really focused on making the broad learning environment, the libraries, the labs, and so on, available to students. And I feel good about what we accomplished, although there are obviously many areas in which we could have done better, and we'll try to do better in the future.
Thank you, everybody. So let's turn to the fall, to where we're going. Many of us thought, or at least hoped, that this coming school year would be a return to normalcy, if you will. Now we're here, and it doesn't quite look like that. So when we think about the uncertainty of what the fall is going to look like, what are some of the key issues you guys are facing? And are there triggers or indicators that you guys are looking for in terms of that will guide your decision making about some of these decision points that you're going to face?
I mean, for us, we have the internal data. We've looked at the national data, which says the same thing, which is in-person learning is far superior overall than Zoom-based learning. It's just far superior. And so every decision that I'm making right now with my leadership team and with my community, with my board, is focused on doing everything we can to get open and stay open. Whether that is from incentivizing vaccination of staff and eligible students, to masking requirements, to really thinking through what are our cleaning protocols, what are our safety protocols, what are our testing protocols, and how we can be creative to be open and stay open in person. And at the same time, quite frankly, very quietly building all the contingency plans that we know we may need. But every time I focus on contingency planning, flipping to hybrid, flipping to remote, the the trauma of the past year starts really rearing its ugly head on my leaders and my teachers. And so it is really a fine line in terms of how deeply we go to do that level of planning.
I will add that, the challenge is that we have blind spots about student needs related to mental health and wellness. We just don't know the level of impact from trauma, loss, and isolation, and how that will play out, right, when everyone is back in. So some key issues, the academic and social emotional recovery for everyone, including our adults, addressing those long-standing gaps. I think about bringing thousands for us, about 6,000 of our students stayed completely remote last year. And so they'll be coming back for the first time in 18 months and continuing to leverage some of the practices, home visits to a deeper degree, the partnerships with our community-based providers. And then, of course, plus one on what Jeremy said there is, the triggers and how we think about our standard operating procedures, which I believe is what kept us open for as long as we were able to last year. Such strict procedures. And, to the extent that we're able to go a step further in the recommended strategies, we are. For example, cohorting, right? We know it's just a recommendation. We're actually implementing cohorting, which is hard to do in a district of almost 18,000 students. And then all the other mitigations that Jeremy spoke about. But to go back to virtual options, we would need to see substantively different external health conditions, and a significant and sustained rise in COVID cases in the Harvard community. And also that translating to a significant and sustained rise in school-based cases as well. So we've already, communicated what those trigger points would be. We did pivot several times. We learned a lot. And would we do it again? And are we ready to do it again? I'm not asking to do it again, but if we had to, there were lots of learnings there that we were able to codify.
I do think that having a system to think through what are the different modalities is pretty important. And we have a system that's very common: green, yellow, orange, and red. And last year we were in yellow for a good part of the time. We went very briefly to green, which maybe wasn't such a good idea. We went back up in yellow and then eventually orange, it went up and down. And under orange, we keep all the Yale college kids in their residential college, and the kids who live off campus are supposed to stay off campus, and everything goes remote. I don't love that. And we don't think it should be necessary because, of course, we have a vaccine requirement and 98% of our students roughly have been vaccinated. And so we're very hopeful that it won't be necessary, but we have other kinds of adjustments we can make, insisting on masking, potentially changing how many people are in the dining hall. We have a limit on gatherings right now, and we might increase it or decrease it. So it's a sort of question of monitoring and getting the best advice, which fortunately we have a great medical school and a great team in public health who've been able to help us with that. And like everybody else, my goal is to have as many students have the full in-person educational experience as possible, even though there are things that we've learned about doing Zoom and online types of education that we'll use, but the key thing is to have the in-person education.
So I think what I would add, and it's helpful to go forth because so much of what my colleagues said is exactly what I would have offered. And I would start just with a really brief story. That is probably 5 weeks ago, I sat at the table I'm sitting in my office. We were the last college in Rhode Island to remain masked, and we serve something like 7,000 students in the summertime. And I had been getting a lot of feedback, a euphemism, from a variety of people, students and employees, that sort of, why were we still masked when the rest of Rhode Island wasn't masked? And I remember exactly where I was sitting, where I said to our provost, this is so thrilling. We're going to lose the masks. And when we open up in the fall for the first time in 18 months, we'll be able to see each other's faces and our students' faces. And you know where this story is going. Pretty much the next day, we saw the Delta take over Rhode Island, our numbers going up. And so now here we are. I think I would offer just a couple of observations. One, the relief dollars coming out of Washington, D.C. will keep our college operating for the next 18 months. I cannot overstate the importance of that. For those of you who don't sit in this space specifically, the simple description would be those dollars were allocated in the higher ed space based on financial need of the students we serve. So we are able to take those dollars and invest them in all the mitigation effort that's going to need to keep our campus actually operational, and also devote millions and millions of dollars to COVID recovery scholarships, debt forgiveness, in order to try to bring the thousands of students that we have lost due to this pandemic. In terms of specifically the return to campus plan, I don't think you can be, in this country without watching, as Jeremy so I think poignantly said, the sort of, I think, a tragic politicization of what is a healthcare crisis and is based in science. What we have done here at CCRI is to mandate a vaccine for all students who want to return to in-person classes with, of course, religious and medical exemptions, to strongly encourage our employees to do the same. For the employees that are not going to be vaccinated, they will be required to aggressive testing in order to be able to come to work. I will tell you that I will be very supportive should our governor go ahead and mandate a required vaccine. I see Jeremy smiling for state employees. That is an administrative decision. We are following UConn very closely. About 10 days ago, UConn required that. I believe that is the right decision and would certainly join the governor in making that requirement for our employees. With that said, we have a very high percentage of our employees already vaccinated. The mask mandate is going to stay in place. And the last thing I would offer just about what it's going to look like here, we've been able to invest, those millions of dollars into high flex classrooms. So for students who get COVID, and we are seeing, across the country, I think a really sobering number of breakthrough cases, never mind from the non-vaccinated. So we will have for the first time what we never had through the first 18 months of COVID, the ability, if Jeremy's in my classroom and he or his family gets COVID, I can just turn my camera on and Jeremy can stay in the classroom. So I think, I guess I would just say thank you to all of you who have helped create a tax system that our college can actually function. And in terms of triggers, unlike Pericles, we don't have a medical school. So we're working very closely with the Rhode Island Department of Health and very close partnership. And we'll really take our guidance from them in terms of when we'll need to pivot. The last thing I'll say is very much what Jeremy said, the trauma. We actually do know how to pivot. That is not where we are focusing our energy. We are focusing our energy on welcoming back, we hope, 13,000 students in about a week.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everybody. Megan's response reminded me happily of the, I think, approximately 2 mask-free weeks we spent at SOM before we had to put the masks back on. So one theme that emerged in all of the responses from public pre-K all the way up through Yale is this idea that in-person learning is preferable to distance learning, and that's true for a variety of reasons. Let's think first about the academic side of things, thinking about the curriculum, and in particular, sort of learning loss and differential learning loss for students from more or less economically vulnerable backgrounds. I guess the question I have for you guys is, how do we measure this learning loss? How do we address it? What have you seen? What are your plans as you move forward for how to catch students up or identify areas of need that maybe are atypical compared to a standard year?
So we're not typical of the other 3 leaders here, but I think what we've discovered is a couple of things. One is that in general, it tended to be the wealthier kids who took a gap year last year because they just had more opportunities, things they could do with their time. So we had a somewhat different demographic makeup on campus than we had in previous years. I think that did, and then that compounded with the fact that we had to teach so much on Zoom, it made us aware of some of the challenges in some of our curriculum for people who went to, you know, whose prior schooling probably didn't prepare them totally for first year at Yale. The additional thing is that we have a commitment to not reduce our admissions. So we've admitted the same 1,600 students that we had been planning to admit, and we have 400 students who deferred from last year. So the entering class who are showing up right now are around 2,000 students, which is by far the largest group we've ever had at Yale. And that's meant thinking very carefully about introductory English courses, introductory math courses, you know, the foreign language requirement. How are you going to teach microeconomics when there's more students than will fit in a regular lecture hall, even without social distancing? So we have had to think through the curriculum and the delivery very carefully. We've done a lot of training with faculty in our, maybe this doesn't apply to you so much, Seth, but for many parts of the university in our Porvu Center for Teaching and Learning. And I feel that one of the things I'm very proud of is the faculty really care a lot about making sure that the students don't lose the learning. And so there's been just a huge commitment on the part of faculty.
Pericles, I assure you that I also care a lot.
I, of course, meant that you got different learning support than
I know. I just want to jump in here on the steps you're taking to sort of measure and sort of address learning loss.
Jeremy, you going to jump in? No?
I dropped in the chat just a study that McKinsey did over the summer, really looking at a bunch of data coming out of, some different, mostly online testing that was happening around the country, and also some surveys that were happening. And whether it's the academic learning loss, which, months of lost learning in reading and math, or some of the social emotional challenges, reports of depression, reports of anxiety, that's all there to peruse. And so that's in the chat now. And I think it's sobering, and it matches our internal data, and it matches anecdotally what we're seeing, hearing, and from our families and our kids as we're talking with them. What we're doing about that is, again, to Megan's point about the resources from the federal government, critically, we were able to offer in-person programming for, we had over 500 of our 2,000 young people in programs this summer, from kindergarten through high school. And that we really hope and believe is going to make a big difference in accelerating the learning and closing gaps.
So we're starting to get, the end of year state results back, certainly at the state level. And that's giving us a sense of the impact. First, our district-wide, interim assessments, right? We do those 3 times throughout the year last year, and we got a sense of where we had to shape interventions. And, we also had to look at our attendance, survey data, anecdotal feedback, and there were no surprises there in terms of, students were deeply impacted, and, attendance and engagement decreased, especially for students that were remote, in a remote learning modality. Our reading and math scores declined. Our graduation rate dipped 2% for the class of 2020. And, we're looking now, we're actually worried, about our special transition point, right? That 3rd grade transition, 3rd to 4th grade, reading and reading and math at the 8th grade level. Those were challenging points for us. And we know that a high quality curriculum, right? It's essential for recovery, but we know that that's not enough. So we're focusing also through relief funding, the resources to customize student support, small group, high dosage tutorial. We heard so much from our community about reducing class size. We're not reducing class size across the board, but we are reducing class size in K3 and then in 9th and 10th grade for schools that have higher levels, of need. So we have targeted supports and interventions, and then there's a whole wraparound approach that we're implementing. We did have what we call the community school model, which offers wraparound supports before, during, after school to students and their families. We've expanded that from, for example, 8 schools to 13 schools, and expanding the services to weekend-based services as well for students and families.
Thanks a lot.
So we have a research team here that can produce the answer to what's the difference between pre-COVID and now, and it's really sobering. We had a 6 percentage point decline in success rates, so successful academic course completion, pre and post or current pandemic. And I chose English just as a data point, an even more concerning decline there, so 9 percentage points. For those of you in the ed space, those are dramatic declines and completely counter to what we had spent the last 5 years driving. In terms of, so what are we doing about it? I think I would organize my response in 3 categories. One, community partnerships, in particular our K through 12. So we have a just world-class commissioner of K through 12 education here in Rhode Island, Commissioner Infante Green. She is fearless. You should all read about her. And so we have a partner who is working closely with us so that we can help be part of the conversation, so that her 12th graders arrive ideally with some college credits under their belt, and they have a sense of confidence and understanding of what it is to be a college student. I think second, what have we done with our faculty and staff? And I know if we get to it, one of the questions is, so is there a silver lining? I sort of find it impossible to answer that question, but what I would say is this crisis created, I think, an awareness for every employee at this college that if we kept doing things the way we had always done them, we should just padlock the doors and give up. And so it has been really inspiring to watch our faculty and staff realize we have to meet students where they are. And that means thinking about how we work with our students in a fundamentally different way. And in fact, those ways will be retained, I hope, when we come back into our physical spaces. And so the examples I would offer, we have finally a true first-year learning experience at our college. So I'm going to speak in shorthand because I figure there's probably most people listening kind of have a sense of where I'm going. So that I think is a key example. Second, a new student orientation, where when you walk in our college, you get a sense of where this place is and where you can go for help. Finally, given that we know that our Black male students have been the most profoundly impacted in terms of enrollment, retention, and student learning outcomes, that's where we have really focused our resources on these small learning communities with advisors and mentors. That's one of my groups, and we all know what a difference it makes to have a mentor who basically says on your hard day, yes, you can do this, and I'm here to support you. In terms of our staff, we really have invested those relief dollars in professional development. Those basic teaching skills, many of them are transferable, ironically, from what we were teaching about online delivery into the classroom. So the retention of how you engage with students, how you meet them where they are, and it's not, in fact, first about your discipline, but it's first about how do you teach our students. I'm optimistic that we're going to hold on to that. And we decided as a college to really prioritize what we're calling, it's a squishy word, or 2 words, but a caring community. And we have really done that both with our faculty and our staff. And it's an entire sort of shared learning curriculum. And I'm optimistic it's going to make a difference. So those are just a sort of a handful of ways that we're trying to respond in order to recover the damage that the pandemic has had on the college and our students.
Thanks, Megan. So both Leslie and Megan mentioned issues with enrollment declines and attendance. Just so people are familiar, with the facts on the ground here, these are national problems. So there were about 1 million fewer children enrolled in K-12 education in fall 2020 than there were the previous year, which is 2% of all the students in school, right? With most of those in younger grades. And there were about 20% fewer students enrolled in two-year colleges in particular. So this is a challenge. It isn't just about Rhode Island or Connecticut. It's a national thing. Let's move on now to think about other aspects of sort of student and faculty success. So we touched a little bit in one of the earlier questions on measures related to health and safety as they relate to students, teachers, as well as to staff. I was wondering if you guys could highlight for us sort of the key issues that you're facing, the procedures that you're putting in place, and whether you have sort of a rule in mind that's going to cause you to shift, for example, to online learning versus in person, or whether that's something that you're going to play by ear as the semester moves forward.
I don't want to say it's inconceivable because, this vaccine has turned out to have waning efficacy that we weren't entirely expecting. But we feel that we should be able to maintain in-person education. We have regular testing for everybody who's on campus all the time. If you're a faculty member who only comes in once in a while, you don't necessarily have to be tested. We have vaccines for 93% of the staff and 98 or so percent of the students. I do think we are aware that some faculty have serious health considerations, and in those cases, we will have a very small number of remote classes, and there will likely be interruptions during the course of the year, like, your kid's school closes, your kid is in quarantine, or your elderly relative needs help, or you get sick, or the students in your class get sick. So we are building in sort of some kinds of redundancy, like filming some of the most important classes that are most key to people's progress, things similar to what Megan mentioned earlier. So we're hopeful that we do have a safety net, but we're really going to try and make it as much in person as possible.
Seth, I'll be brief because I actually feel like I answered it previously. We have a vaccine. I think it's different than what it was 18 months ago, and we are going to do our damnedest to stay in person.
So yes to that as well. There are some key changes for us in terms of the mitigations. One is, well, of course, all of our students are going to come back in person, but it's the redefining distancing, right? Whereas last year it was defined as 6 feet. This year is within 3 feet. And we've decided to allow visitors to come into our facilities, all our schools. That includes our parents and our community-based providers. That is a shift from last year. And when staff or students are vaccinated, if they test positive, they don't necessarily have to quarantine. And so we've made a decision around those 4 key shifts. We're still working really hard to have opportunities for students to access the vaccine. We've had 26, I count them because it feels like we're doing one every week since the spring, vaccination clinics, and 34% of our students that are eligible, have gotten the vaccine. It's much better, at the staff level where 86% of our instructional staff has been vaccinated, but still, as you can see, there's ways to go for students, and the hesitancy is very, very real in our community. Proximity matters to us, and so we are engaging with our families, making home visits, and I hear myself from our families, especially our Latino and our Black families, that they don't trust for a variety of reasons, just historically, right? Mistrust. But there's lack of information. We've had basic questions such as, well, I'm not taking the vaccine because I need to take, ibuprofen on a regular basis, and I don't think that's possible, right? Simple questions that have prompted us to just allow access to experts to answer questions. So, I think it's more complex with regard to, the vaccine. Yes, it's easily available, but the accessibility, there are different reasons why they're not being accessed.
I'll be honest, I want to have hope, but I'm pretty anxious. A year ago, the week before school started, we had to delay our opening because my entire custodial staff, which was together, ultimately had to quarantine. And so we put off our opening. This week, I have 7 nurses, 2 of whom have breakthrough cases right now. And it is really difficult to open school during a pandemic when you don't have nurses. Fortunately, no one was sick from that group of custodians last year. And the symptoms that my nurses have today, they're mild, and they're working remotely, they're working hard, and they're actually scheduled to be back for next week. But it is a wake up to think about breakthrough cases and the impact of that. Very fortunate that the ICUs are not filled with breakthrough cases. The ICUs are filled with people who are unvaccinated or are medically fragile and vaccinated. They're not filled with breakthroughs. But I continue to be very anxious as much as I want to be excited and hopeful. And part of that is what Leslie said around the distancing is, we were at 6 feet. We were able to be at 6 feet because we had a third of our kids at home last year. Everyone's back. And so the distancing's gone. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited for kindergarten to look like kindergarten again. Kindergarten's full of turn and talks. Kindergarten's sitting on the carpet reading a book. That's not even 3 feet. Like, it's just not. But we might be walking into something that we don't fully appreciate and know what we're walking into. And so, anxious.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think a big question in everybody's mind that we can't know the answer to yet is what will happen when school comes back. And, if it gets colder and it's harder to go outside, and it's, vaccine rates in the Northeast are relatively high, but what does that mean for how this will play out? We'll have to see. So turning now to the other kinds of things we learn in school, right? So education is not the only thing we get out of going to school, of course, right? We learn to be together. We learn social skills. My daughter is attending kindergarten starting in the fall, and I'm excited for her, to see her on the carpet with other kids, reading books. We learn so many skills beyond just, how to do math, how to read. And it seems likely that the gap has opened up there as well as students have been away from each other. You have entering 9th graders who may not have been in school since 7th grade. We have teachers and other staff who may feel nervous coming back to full buildings. So how do you guys think about sort of providing the social support and the emotional support that people need to come back effectively, to feel safe, and to catch up in some cases, especially maybe for younger kids, on social skills that are hard to learn when you're not around people your own age?
Seth, I think you have to name it, right? And you've just named it, and we've named it as an organization at BVP. Mm-hmm. We've named social emotional health of our young people and of our staff as a critical priority. We are formally launching organization-wide after a soft launch over the last year and a half, circles as a tool to bring our community together, to be restorative and in the biggest and broadest and way as a way of really sort of naming for everyone. We've gone through and we're continuing to go through something that's pretty big. And we're all impacted and we're all affected by it, and we're all going to work together to get through it together. But I think if you name it, you have an opportunity to face it. And I think if we don't name it and we avoid it, we hide it, or we just say, oh, forward, we're going to plow through, we're going to reopen. Like we're ultimately, I think, going to stumble, but by naming it, I think we have a shot of doing it together.
That reminder is so important. I shared that with our staff and our families. Like, there was no playbook for managing a pandemic. There still is no playbook on how we're going to kind of finish through, right? And then recover after that. So there's a certain level of humility that we have to hold on to. And we know that research tells us, right, that in order for us to influence others, influence change, right, we have to relate to them. There's a humanistic element to that. Students don't learn without the relationships, adult learners, right? We need to learn from one another. So for us, in addition to circle restorative approaches, we now are having advisory periods across all of our schools. We had them at certain high schools. Now it's just, part of the way of work. And at the adult level, we have added collaborative structures. We had, PLCs or professional learning communities, but we've been more intentional about that. So our Wednesdays last year had to be half-day Wednesdays out of necessity and quite frankly, out of bargaining. This year, it's just part of the way of work where we are allowing our staff to have additional time to learn from one another, but to focus on, that wellness as well. It's not just around of course, right, teaching and learning, but to your point, Jeremy, taking care of the self and taking care of one another. And then we overlay what the pandemic relief funds, are allowing for. The one-on-one tutorial, the mentoring supports as to what Megan, referenced, and then the community-based, for us to think that we're going to be able to do this without our community partners, we would be doing a disservice.
In terms of the general question about emotional health and building it in a community and working and living with people, of course, the residential college system is distinctive, and I think what was a great asset in the past year, just because if you were living in the residential college, which had to be less dense, but nonetheless, you could get together and have your meals in the courtyard at times when it wasn't okay to eat indoors. You could, socialize in groups of up to, I forget the exact numbers, but it tend to be from 6 to 10 indoors. And, we had all the support that goes with the residential college system. We've added quite a lot of mental health support. Obviously, it's an extremely stressful year for everybody and particularly for students. And one of the things we've done is added mental health counselors who live in the or who are located in the colleges to make them more accessible to students so they don't have to walk over to Log Street. Of course, we've also added telehealth. That said, we had a young woman commit suicide last year, which is something that happens in some years, but I certainly think that the stress of the, isolation and so on that connects that's connected to the pandemic cannot have helped in that situation. We had a few other more graduate and professional student deaths that were neither COVID related nor, mental health related, well, not related to the mental health of the person affected, but all of these things in a community that's already under a huge amount of stress, the stress sort of ripples through the entire community. People in the School of Environment, when a popular student there died, people in the School of Nursing. And so having to, there's just no doubt there's an incredibly hard time, and devoting the resources and thinking creatively about how to address young people's mental health in this situation is absolutely key.
Seth, I think what I would add, and again, if you look at what we're seeing nationally, CCRI is not an outlier. In fact, higher education isn't an outlier in this respect, sort of what we look at our country's workforce. So the two data points that I would share, I think that indicate we are still in the belly of this, the number of unfilled vacancies. So if anyone is interested in an exciting position in human resources or IT at a hard driving transformational community college, we have a position for you. I think equally poignantly, though, we had a really successful recruiting season for faculty, and we had nearly a third after they accepted the position come back to us and say, essentially, due to COVID, I am just not in a position to leave my community and relocate to Rhode Island for this opportunity. So that was hard to see. And I think I share it just as an indicator of where we are when Jeremy talks about naming it. I think, so what are we doing about it? So much of what I heard the others share, we are investing in our very limited dollars in increasing the number of full-time social workers that we have at the college. Leslie talked about sort of our community partners. The only way we do anything is through a collective impact model. So really, I think Jeremy said it, naming it, talking about it, taking it out of the shadows, making it part of just routine discourse is a shift I've seen in Rhode Island across our space, even in the last 18 months. In terms of our employees, I'll say two things. The first is really looking at our policies for work and re-looking at some and then designing new ones. So alternative work arrangements to really respond to some of the circumstances Pericles was describing. And then the other thing I would say, and I didn't hear it on this call, really thinking about what a remote work policy looks like. I think if we're going to fill the vacancies in IT, we're going to have to get serious about remote work. I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to move to that for our student-facing positions by and large, because that's not how we're going to run this college. But in terms of the positions like IT, we need to start thinking about that more critically. The last thing I'll say, it's inspiring to me to listen to Jeremy and Leslie talk about the way they're investing in their employees' care. I'm reading every morning about employees across the country who are talking about how tiresome they find it from their CEOs and leadership teams who tell them, go take care of yourself. I don't think at CCRI, I don't think we're there yet. So I think one of the things we really need to prioritize when we finally are back with each other is what is within our power to effectuate, to really make that have weight as opposed to just being some well-written line. So if I'm honest, I think we have some work to do there, and I'm committed to doing it.
Thanks, Megan. So let's turn now a little bit to the bigger picture. So the pandemic, and we've been alluding to this a little bit in talking about longer run plans, is changing the education system in a variety of ways. I'm curious to hear from you about which of sort of the changes to your business model or to your delivery model, to your social model, which have changed, and do any of those changes seem like things that'll stick as we move, hopefully beyond COVID eventually?
I can jump in quickly. I would offer three things, and yet another example of make the crisis an opportunity. I think I said this the last time. I think all institutions, including my own, need to get out of the ivory tower and actually be more responsive to our customers. What COVID, I think, has helped all of us realize as we faced an enrollment crisis, we have to be more responsive to the labor market. And so I think that is something I could share in a whole number of ways, starting with just credentials and degrees that we have designed and now implemented that are delivering what our students need in order to get a good paying first job. So I would say more responsive to the labor market. We're going to hold on to that. Second, a greater online presence, though we're never going to become an entirely online institution. And we have a lot of, those are fundamentally different things. I listened to Pericles earlier talking about sort of teaching your class on Zoom. I'll state the obvious, the way to run a high quality, I'll say higher education online institution actually isn't, you don't take your lecture and put it onto Zoom. That, if I'm honest, is largely where many of our courses still are. It's not what SNU's doing. It's not what Western Governor, it's not what the institutions that are disrupting the model are doing. So we have a lot of learning to do to think about, to the degree that we're going to hold on to, I'll say 30% of our course offerings now will be online as opposed to 8% prior to the pandemic. We've got to go beyond the take your lecture notes and deliver it on Zoom. We're getting there, but we're going to keep going. And then finally, and relatedly, that high flex classroom that I talked about, we could never have afforded the technology that would be required to set up our hundreds of classrooms without those federal relief dollars. Those are built to last over the near term. We're going to use those.
That is terrific, Megan. I think there are a couple of things that are quite similar, interestingly, even though we're obviously in like different segments, as it were. One is that I do think that while, just teaching your lecture on Zoom isn't innovative itself, I think that the experience of having to take their courses online caused faculty to think more about how do I engage students, whether it's a quiz, a response, a poll, whether it's online materials that are available, getting them to go watch a TED Talk or whatever it might be, and more complex things than that too. Some of them were quite creative. So that may affect in-person education because you deliver in-person education differently and more engagingly. And then secondly, we're not going to move Yale College. We offer some Yale College courses online for people who just want enrichment. We're not going to give Yale College degrees online, but some of our professional schools that are trying to help people to get professional credentials, often people who are in their 30s, may not be ready to, move to New Haven and change their job, are thinking about, we've just enrolled the first class in our online Masters of Public Health, which is actually a very strong class of students. We have a lot of stuff going on with SOM, but we're also working with nursing and a couple of other schools to make more professional education available online.
So for us, the technology, has redefined how we can support students differently, and having more of it, right? So we went from only 40% of our students having a device to now we're 2 to 1. Flexible learning schedules is something that we are keeping this year to a smaller scale. We learned from some of our high schoolers that they had to take on jobs to support their families, and it is not a situation that any one of our students should be in. And so we are offering a flexible learning schedule for students where they'll have opportunity to learn in a blended way, but also in the evenings. And from an organizational perspective, one thing that we are keeping is our continuous improvement approaches. We had this essential question that kept coming up for me throughout the pandemic last year is, how do I and my team use project and performance management to drive change at a system level in service of all of our students while still navigating these unprecedented times. And so it forced us to create structures and systems to quickly respond and leverage data in a really fast way. So, it's transforming the way that we're working moving forward. And the other more naming conditions that need to exist for us is around pipeline and educator workforce. And we have a shortage now. We had this influx of federal funding, and the majority of it was tied to, academic and social emotional supports and full-time employees that I can't fill positions for now. So, thinking of how do we build, a sustainable pipeline that not only retains, but diversifies our workforce.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, sorry, Jeremy, we haven't heard from you, but it's okay if you don't want. Okay, yeah, so let's, although there was much more we could talk about here, I think we're running a little bit short of time. So maybe we can turn it over now to the audience and go to the question and answer session. I've got questions in the chat that I can read. If you also want to raise your hand, we can try to call on you, although I'm not totally sure, to be honest, how that works. We'll do our best to handle that. Let's start with one from the chat. So Esther Zerbel asks, what do you do to bridge the socioeconomic gap between those who got and continue to get an education? It was different for students from public versus private institutions.
I mean, Blackstone Valley Prep's pretty unique in that we are intentionally diverse. We have urban and suburban kids coming together across lines of difference in our enrollment, and so we have, my kids are in our program. We have kids who are experience pretty significant financial and other traumas and challenges, from homelessness to stability of income, etc. And it's really, it's forced us to really reckon with how do we think about, last year, online learning. Every teacher wants cameras on. Every teacher wants that. Yet the technology and the homes didn't allow it. The bandwidth didn't allow it. The CPU processing of the Chromebooks that we scrounged together to get to one-to-one didn't allow it. But my daughter, who goes to BVP, was on a MacBook with a gig coming into the house, right? And so how do we reconcile that, and how do we make the investments so that longer term this year and beyond, we're past that and better than that. And so those are some of the things. I think technology and digital divide is very real. I think food security has been a very real divide that we've taken on. Really proud of how our team has even through the summer delivered thousands and thousands of meals to our families to ensure food security, close that tech divide. But also to partner with, local foundation that's donating books to children's homes, because we know that more than a third of our kindergartners have fewer than 5 books in their houses, right? So we have a foundation that's buying books for kids' homes, right? And thinking creatively around closing those gaps so that they're more prepared for success.
Thanks. So Gail Meister asks, what kinds of training did staff need, and do they still need, to pivot to effective online or hybrid instruction? So we'll see if they still need it going forward this year.
Our staff.
Huge range. Oh, go ahead, Leslie.
Our staff needed it and asked for it again for this year, and so we did have a blended approach to professional learning, right? Everyone was at a different place in the continuum. And so that is work that continues, because we know that our students said to us that they did want more blended learning opportunities, project-based learning. And so we owe it to our staff to continue to build their capacity in that space.
I think there was a question about the opportunities that are created. We got faculty who had never really thought that they needed any, because faculty at a place like Yale, they're like, I'm the expert in X field. They don't realize that there are experts in teaching also. And so we got people in the door to attend sessions about how to design your course and so on. And they realized that it's not just about how do you use Zoom, it's actually about thinking about the pedagogy, and that they don't really teach you that in graduate school in a lot of fields anyway. A lot of PhD programs, you don't really learn a lot about pedagogy. So we've managed to engage faculty in a different way.
I can verify that they don't teach you about pedagogy in economics PhD programs. So we have Peter Pettit asking about the pipeline question with respect to primary and secondary public education. Will the pandemic bring about much needed changes in certification requirements? I believe this is about teacher certification. I don't think it's a state secret that certification makes for better classroom instruction.
I can quickly jump in. So something's got to change because certainly at the rate that we're going, and I'm only speaking to the urban context here in Hartford, I have a teacher shortage. I don't have speech and language therapists that I need. I don't have the occupational therapists that I need, math and science. And so the pipeline work is going to require rethinking, redefining, redesigning the teacher role. It is something that we are working on, engaging a design team with teachers and other stakeholders to see what that could look like. And we're really focusing on the newcomers, right? The new teachers, and potentially, devising a professional learning modality in which perhaps they have a lesser teacher role and they spend their first and second year, right, with a more experienced teacher, so that it can, long-term, potentially as a retention, and then we're building capacity. So I do believe that from a certification perspective, there has to be a different way of looking at it.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So I think we are a little bit over time here, but it's easy to go over time. That's completely on me as the moderator. It's easy to go over time when we've got so much to talk about. I found this incredibly informative, both as an educator, but also as a parent. I hope the audience also has gotten something out of it as well. So let me just say thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to share their insights with us and a break from what I'm sure is a very busy schedule for everybody. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Seth. Thanks to all of my colleagues and good luck with the start of the year. I admire the challenges you're taking on.
Thank you,
Everyone be safe.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much for your participation and your wonderful insights.
Good night.